1. Late one evening, a certain workman happened to be returning home from a jovial feast in a distant village when he met an old friend, a man who had been dead some 10 years. "Good health, brother," said the dead man. "Good health to you, brother," the reveler replied, forgetting his friend was long dead. "Come to my house, brother," said the dead man. "Let us raise a glass or two, or 3. The two friends soon arrived at a run-down dwelling, which was apparently where the dead man lived. Soon the vodka was flowing, but eventually even the thirsty workman had had enough. "It's time for me to go home," he said. "Stay a bit. Why do you want to go now? Spend the night here with me," said the dead man. "No, brother. Don't ask. I can't stay. I've got lots to do tomorrow, so I need to get home." "Well, goodbye then. But why walk? Take my horse. It will get you home quickly." "Thanks. My, that's a fine gray stallion," said the workman. And so he got on the stallion's back and was carried off, for it had turned into a whirlwind. But just then the rooster crowed, and the reveler passed out. And when he came to, all he could see around him were graves. And then he realized he'd been riding a tombstone. "Giddy up!" Warren here. "You know, I've woken up in some strange places, but never in the graveyard. Yet." 2. Once upon a time, and back in the day, there lived in a certain village 2 young men, best friends, who regarded each other as brothers. One day they made a vow. Whoever married first was to invite his comrade to the wedding, whether the comrade was dead or alive. About a year after this, one of the young men fell ill and died. A few months later, his friend took it into his head to get married. Now, on the day of the wedding, as he went to fetch his bride, he remembered his vow, and as they drove past the graveyard, he stopped the horses, saying, "I'm going to my friend, my brother's grave. I shall ask him to come to the wedding. A right trusty friend was he to me." So he went to the grave and called aloud, dear friend, today is my wedding day, and I hereby invite you to my wedding." Suddenly the grave opened, and the dead man arose and said, "Thank you, brother. That has fulfilled your promise to me. Please step inside my humble abode, and let us raise a glass apiece in honor of your marriage." I'd love to come in, but the marriage procession is stopping outside. All the folks are waiting for me." "Hey, brother," replied the dead man, "it won't take long to toss off a glass." The bridegroom jumped into the grave. The dead man poured him a shot, and he drank it off. And 100 years passed away. Another, dear friend," said the dead man. "The first one is for thirst, the second one for flavor." The bridegroom downed the second shot, and 200 years passed away. "Now, my comrade, a third shot. For death," said the dead man, "and then go, in God's name, and celebrate your marriage." The bridegroom took the third shot, and 300 years passed away as the coffin lid fell and the grave closed. The bridegroom looked around. Instead of the graveyard, he found himself standing in the middle of a piece of waste ground. No road could be seen, no kinsmen, no horses. All around grew nettles and tall grass. He ran to the village, but the village wasn't the same. The houses were different, and the people were all strangers to him. He went to the priest, but the priest was different, not the man he had known. The groom told the priest about everything that had happened to him and demanded an explanation. And so the priest searched through the church records and found that 300 years before, to the very day, a bridegroom had gone to the graveyard on his wedding day and had disappeared. His bride, after enough time had passed, married another man. The moral of the story: nervous bridegrooms who drank too many toasts on their wedding day may find themselves toast. One, the dead mother. In a certain village there lived a loving husband and wife. Lived happily until the wife died in childbirth. The poor peasant wept and moaned, and above all was in despair about the babe. How was he to nourish it now? How to bring it up without its mother? So he did the best he could and hired an old woman to look after the child. But here was a real mystery. All day long the baby would cry and refuse to eat. There was no way to comfort it. Yet it would sleep peaceably at night, all night. This just doesn't make any sense, thought the old woman. I know. I'll keep awake tonight and see what I can find out. So she kept awake, and just after midnight she heard someone quietly open the door and go to the cradle. The babe became still, just as if it was being breastfed. The next night the same thing took place, and on the third night too. So the old woman finally told the peasant about it. He called all his relatives together to ask what he should do, and they decided to keep awake on a certain night and spy out who it was that came to feed the baby. So, on the appointed night, when the darkness took control, they all lay down on the floor. This was but a one-room cottage, and beside them they hid a lighted candle under an earthen pot. At midnight, the cottage door opened, and someone, or something, stepped up to the cradle. The baby became still, and at that precise moment, someone suddenly brought out the light. In horror, they saw the dead mother, wearing the clothes in which she was buried, down on her knees beside the cradle, over which she bent as she fed the baby at her dead breast. The moment the light shone upon her, the dead mother stood up, gazed sadly at her little one, and then went out of the room without a sound, not saying a word to anyone. All those who saw her stood for a time terror-struck, and when they finally nerved themselves to approach the cradle, they found that the baby was dead. The moral of the story: sometimes curiosity kills more than the cat. 2. The Warlock. Once upon a time, and back in the day, there lived a peasant, and he had 3 married sons. He lived a long while, and was looked upon by the people of the village as a wizard or warlock. When he was about to die, he ordered his sons to have their wives keep watch over his body for 3 nights, each wife taking 1 night apiece. He also demanded that his body should be placed in the living room, and that his sons' wives should spin wool to make him a caftan. Finally, he ordered that no cross should be placed on his body, and that none should be worn by his daughters-in-law. The first night, the eldest daughter-in-law took her seat beside him with some gray wool and began spinning. Midnight arrived, and then the father-in-law, lying in his coffin, said, "Daughter, are you there?" She was terribly frightened, but answered reasonably firmly, "I am." The father-in-law then said, "Are you sitting?" I sit." "Do you spin?" "I spin." "Gray wool?" "Gray." "For a caftan?" "For a caftan." He arose from the coffin and moved towards her. For a second time he asked, "Daughter, are you there?" "I am." "Are you sitting?" I sit." "Do you spin?" "I spin." "Gray wool?" "Gray." "For a caftan?" "For a caftan." She shrank back into a corner, but he followed her, and before she could pray, he reached out and strangled her. And then he returned to his coffin. In the morning, the warlock's sons removed the body of the dead wife, and unbelievably, the next evening, they sent another daughter-in-law to keep watch. And the warlock strangled her as well. He strangled her as well before he returned to his coffin. But the third wife was smarter than the first 2 wives. Indeed, she was smarter than the entire family. Before sitting up with the corpse, she claimed to have taken off her cross, but in reality, she hid it and kept it on. She took her seat and spun, but said prayers to herself while she worked. Midnight arrived, and her father-in-law said from his coffin, "Daughter, are you there?" "I am," she replied. "Are you sitting?" "I sit." "Do you spin?" "I spin." "Gray wool?" "Gray." "For a caftan?" "For a caftan." The warlock rose from the coffin and began to follow the young wife around the room, eventually trapping her in a corner. But when he attacked, she laid the cross upon him, tapping him on the forehead, and he fell down, truly, truly and forever dead. Afterward, the young wife looked into the coffin and found it full of money and jewels. It appeared her father-in-law wanted to take it all away with him. Take it all away with him, or only give it to someone who could outwit him. The moral of the story: they say you can't take it with you, but some are still gonna try. One. The Feast of the Dead. One night, some girls had arranged an evening party, so of course they had to have some vodka. But as they were returning home with the liquor, they saw some skeletons lying by the side of the road. "Yo!" they cried. "Bones, Bones, come and be our guests. We are having an evening party. Bones, Bones, come and be our guests." So they went home with the vodka and stepped in over the threshold. But the skeletons were already there, sitting at the table, and they yelled to the maidens, "Vodka! Vodka!" So the girls gave them vodka. What else could they do? "Give us bread!" the skeletons bellowed. "Black bread!" So they gave them bread. Reluctantly, the girls sat down to eat with their guests, who proceeded to eat up all the meat and everything else they could lay their bony fingers on. Wow. Imagine a skeleton eating meat and drinking vodka. They must have made one hell of a mess of the carpet. Then the skeletons got up to stretch their bony legs, which the frightened girls took as their cue to run away. But the skeletons raced after them. They caught one girl up, and one of the skeletons broke her across his bony knees. The other girls escaped to the barn and hid up in the loft. The skeletons climbed up and called, come out, wherever you are. Come out, wherever you are." The girls remained silent, and the skeletons were just about to depart. But unfortunately, one of the girls had allergies and sneezed. And so the skeletons found them, and then they strangled them. The moral of the story: skeletons who can eat and drink are nothing to sneeze at. 2. The Fox Physician. Once upon a time, and back in the day, an old couple lived out on the steppes. The old man planted a cabbage head in the cellar of his cottage, while the old woman planted one in the manure pile. The old woman's cabbage withered away, but the old man's grew and grew until it brushed the roof of the cellar. The old man took his hatchet and cut a hole in the cottage floor, but the cabbage kept on growing till it brushed the ceiling. So the old man cut a hole in the ceiling, and the cabbage grew and grew up into the sky. How could the old man get a look at the head of the cabbage? At the head of his cabbage. He began climbing up the cabbage stalk, climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing. And eventually, he had to cut a hole in the sky. The old man crawled through the hole and discovered an enormous stove. And as he gazed at the stove in wonder, the door of the stove popped open, and out came a pie and a cake and a jug of vodka. The old man ate and drank his fill, then lay down to sleep. When he awoke, he slid down to earth and cried, "Old woman! Why, old woman, would you like to live up in heaven? There's a stove there, and when it opens, out comes a pie and a cake with a jug of vodka. How can I get there, old man?" "Slip into this sack, old woman. I'll carry you up." Well, the old woman wasn't sure this was a good idea, but eventually she climbed into the sack. The old man then took the sack in his teeth and began climbing, climbing, climbing and climbing and climbing, until the old woman got tired of waiting and asked, "Is it much farther, old man?" "We're only halfway there." Again he climbed and he climbed and he climbed and he climbed and he climbed, and a second time the old woman called, "Is it much farther, old man?" The old man was just beginning to say, "We're only half," when his dentures fell out, and teeth, sack, and old woman fell to the ground a long, long, long way down, fell to the ground, where she was smashed all to pieces. The old man slid down to earth and picked up the sack, but it had nothing in it, nothing but bones, bones broken very small. And so the old man sat down by the remains and wept bitterly. Attracted by the wailing, a fox appeared. "What are you crying about, old man?" "How can I help crying? My old woman is smashed to pieces." "Hold your noise. I'll cure her." The old man fell at the fox's feet. "Cure her. Only cure her. I'll pay you whatever you want." "All right, then." "Well, then, fill the bathtub with hot water. Then put the old woman in there, along with a bag of oatmeal and a pot of butter, and then stand outside the door. But, whatever you do, don't look inside. Don't look inside." The old man filled the tub with hot water and placed the oatmeal and the butter inside the bathroom. Then the fox entered, shut the door, and began washing the old woman's remains. The old man stood just outside the bathroom door. "How's my old woman getting on?" he cried. "Beginning to stir," replied the fox, who ate up the old woman, collecting her bones and piling them in a corner before setting to work kneading a hasty pudding. The old man waited and waited and waited. Finally, he cried again, "How's my old woman getting on?" "Resting a bit," yelled the fox, as he gobbled up the hasty pudding, his dessert. When he had finished, the fox bawled, old man, open wide the door." Well, the old man opened wide the door, and the fox sprang out and disappeared. The old man, poor old man, the old man went into the bathroom. Nothing could be seen but the old woman's bones, picked clean. As to the oatmeal and the butter, they had been eaten up too. And so the old man was left alone, and, in his despair, he wandered to the ends of the earth, where he wound up in Saskatchewan, where his descendants live to this very day. The moral of the story: when all else fails, there's always Saskatchewan. If this is your first visit to my channel, please consider subscribing. My name is Warren, and I write and tell original ghost stories and original horror stories featuring such cryptids as the Night Floaters, werewolves, and the Black-Eyed Children. So again, please consider subscribing. Till midnight, cheers! Source material used today, courtesy of Project Gutenberg, while the pictures were courtesy of Pix Here, that's PX Here, while the music was the ghostly Ghost Processional by that patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod. You know, I've had to record this in less than 30 minutes, so let me know in the comments how well I did or didn't.